Part 4, Exposure. So the idea in this final part is to look at the policies which are there not to reduce your vulnerability, not to reduce the risk of disaster itself, but to reduce the number of people and the amount of assets which are in places which are actually exposed to the risk. And you will see that's a very big part of the question. So here in this part, we will look at two things. First, the question of the network effects. So the network effects, sorry, you could say that it's more part of the vulnerability, but anyway, I will present them now. And the question of the flood zoning. Okay, so the network effect. So it's really a key issue, a key idea of this course today. The network effect, it's the idea that each time that you have a natural disaster, whatever the natural disaster, you have local effects where the natural disaster occurs, local damages, but you also have indirect economic consequences in the rest of the economy, in the rest of the country. Why is it the case? It's the case because when you have a natural disaster which hits somewhere, then it hits some networks, transport networks, electricity networks, power networks, and because of this, a wide zone may be affected. And also, when you have a disaster which hits a place, it can hit some firms, and the clients of the firm or the suppliers of the firm will endure economic losses, and so the suppliers of the suppliers will endure economic losses, the clients of the clients will endure economic losses, and so on and so on. And so when you have a disaster, there are the direct destructions that you can measure, but there is also an indirect cost in the economy because of all these losses, and generally this indirect cost is much larger than the direct cost of the destructions. Also, something else is that there are many people in economics working on this, on how to model and how to understand this propagation of crisis in the economy. And an important idea is that generally it's observed that the magnitude of these indirect costs compared to the direct destructions, so the magnitude of these indirect costs is non-linear with the direct destructions. That is, the bigger the disaster, the even bigger are these indirect costs. So to illustrate this, you can look at this figure. So this figure, maybe you noticed it, but it's a representation of the metro in Paris and the metro lines. And in blue, you can see the Seine River, and the wide blue area represents the flood-prone area around the Seine River. So actually, it corresponds to the places which were flooded during the 1910 flood in the Seine in Paris. And what is represented on this map in red, so this map was done by RATP, the transport authority of the public transport authority in Paris, and what is represented in red are all the lines which would be closed in case of a flood over the River Seine. And also something which is not indicated here is that according to the RATP, in case of a flood, even if the flood only lasts for, let's say, a few hours, then it should take several months or even a year to put back the metro lines into service. So now what I want to highlight on this is that you can see that the flood over the Seine River is it's not wide. I mean, it's only affected a small part of the city, or a small part of Île-de-France. However, even if just a flood like this happens, and even if it happens only during a few hours, I let you imagine what will be the consequences on the economy of Paris of the interruption of all these metro lines for a year. And the consequences will be extremely high and will not only occur just in the places around the Seine River. The consequences will even be felt a priori in the entire Île-de-France region and even in the whole country. And so a very important policy which needs to be implemented when dealing with natural disasters is to try to mitigate this propagation of the risk. And it's something which is quite complex to do, because to do this you need to actually understand how things are related. So there are different ways to do it. So here, for instance, you can see a graph made by C40. So C40, I will come back to this in a future course, but it's basically an institution to help advise cities on their climate policies, both adaptation and mitigation. And here on this graph, you can see how different type of hazards may impact transportation, and how the fact that transportation, when transportation is affected, it might impact many other things in the city, which themselves could have economic consequences. And so nowadays there are people, for instance, consulting firms or universities, trying to do maps like this to understand the interrelations between the different services in the city. And one very good adaptation policy is to try to make the whole city more resilient by either making sure that the key interactions are robust for the disasters, or by making sure that the interactions are always duplicated. For instance, if you're in a city in which to go to the main employment center there is only one road, then there is a high risk that at some point the road is broken by some natural disaster, so the city is very vulnerable. If on the contrary you have like 2 or 3 roads going to the main employment center, then it's much more resilient, because the probability that a disaster occurs on the 3 roads at the same time is very low. That's basically the first idea. The second idea, and it is quite different, is that if you want to reduce the vulnerability to natural disasters, really the first thing to do, and the most impacting thing to do, is to reduce the exposure to the disaster. That is to reduce the number of people exposed to the disaster. And maybe you know that in most countries, and especially in France, there are many regulations to prevent or to limit people to live in dangerous places. But even with these regulations, many people do live in risky zones. For instance, if you take France, a tenth of the population lives in a flood-prone area along a river. And if you add to this the flood-prone areas on the coast due to storm surge, then the estimation is that a quarter of the population lives in a flood-prone area. Just to illustrate this, here you can see a map of Île-de-France, and all the blue dots represent places where people currently live in flood-prone areas. And in Île-de-France, you see it's almost 1 million people who currently live in a flood-prone area. Just to take another example, here it's the Provence-Côte d'Azur region in France, and in this region, here on this map, you can see the color represents the density of population, and the blue areas, which I don't know if they are very visible on the video, but basically the blue areas represent the flood-prone areas. And in total, here again, you have about 1 million people, 20% of the population, who lives in such an area. So obviously, the first question is, okay, what can we do for these people? And for the existing people, it's very difficult to act, because it's very difficult to retrofit the houses to make them resilient. And often, it may be difficult to build higher dikes. But generally, building higher dikes is the easiest thing to do, but it's by itself not easy. Another idea is that something which is important is the fact that the number of people living in risky zones, in flood-prone areas, is generally still increasing. For instance, in the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur region, almost 20% of all houses built since 2010 have been built in flood-prone areas. So it's a huge number. I couldn't find the latest figures for the whole France, but so here I show you some old figures between 2000 and 2006, but the idea is still valid. Between those two dates, here you can see the growth rate of housing surfaces, and what is especially important, it's here on the right, the growth rate in flood zones, zone inondable. Another idea is that there are different ways by law to prevent the construction in flood-prone areas. For instance, in France, you have something which is called les plans de prévention des risques d'inondation, so flood risk prevention plans. So you have in the whole of France maps of where flood risks exist, and normally it's not possible to build there, but still there are always many ways to do it, and still you have construction in these places. So here, for instance, on this graph, on this graph, what is represented is once again the growth rate of the housing surfaces in the country. And in orange, you have the growth rate in flood-prone areas, and in yellow, the growth rate in the other areas, which are not risky. On the right, here, it's the two growth rates in the cities which don't have or which don't apply the flood prevention plans. And you can see that in these cities, basically, the growth rate is not different between flood-prone areas and outside of flood-prone areas. It's even a little bit higher in flood-prone areas. However, on the left, you have what happens in cities who have implemented such a flood prevention plan. And in these cities, there is a huge difference between the growth rate in cities with a flood protection plan and in cities without anyone. However, you can see that even in these cities, the growth rate is non-zero in the risky zones. So here, really, the idea is that in the case of climate change, a very good idea, actually the most efficient way to get adapted to the natural disasters is to try to prevent these constructions and to prevent this increase that we can currently view in the exposure to the risk. And the thing is that if people are currently building in risky zones, in flood-prone areas, it's not because they are stupid. It's because there are many reasons, especially economic reasons, ultimately resulting in the fact that it's really profitable to build in such places, even if it may be risky over the long term. For instance, generally, flood-prone areas are places close to rivers or to the sea, so they are places with a nice view. They are places which are really nice for the inhabitants until you have a flood. Also, you may know that for historical reasons, many cities in Europe, and the same actually in the rest of the world, most cities were built either close to the sea or close to a river, because water used to be one of the main transportation means. And since many cities used to be created by markets, because they were trade places, it's no surprise that nowadays the old part of almost all cities is around the river. And so it means that the old part of many cities, so the densest part, the part in which the real estate prices are higher in almost all cities, are in places close to water, and so in places which are vulnerable to floods. And so since the land prices there are so high, then people still want to build there. And so really, something which is extremely important if you want to decrease the vulnerability, it's to try to understand why people are building in flood-prone areas, and to try to change this. For instance, by creating new activity centers far from risky zones, by creating parks in risky zones, because parks are nice for the surrounding inhabitants, so generally they prefer to have parks that new developments, and so on and so on. And we can discuss about this in the course. So that was what I wanted to tell you on how to get adapted to natural disasters. Obviously, there are many things that could be said about this, and we will come back to a few of these ideas in the next course after the holidays, which will be about how, in practice, you can develop and implement an adaptation plan. Thank you.